I've just finished reading a book called Asylum by Madeleine Roux, and my apologies if I'm pronouncing her last name incorrectly. The story begins when the main character, Dan, heads off to a summer program called New Hampshire College Prep. So he's super excited to be going, like he considers himself something of a science nerd, and he really looks forward to spending time with other students who actually like school and want to be there. He's also really interested in being able to have an experience that simulates like what it's going to be like in college, where he's going to be able to take the classes that he actually wants to take and focus on things that interest him instead of the things that school wants him to learn. He's also really interested in making friends, like in this new environment, though he acknowledges that he's also a little bad at it. So one thing that's unusual about the program this year is that the dormitories where they normally house students are actually being renovated. So instead, the school is housing students in a repurposed mental hospital. I'm not sure why that strikes them as a good idea, like it sounds like a bad idea just off the bat. This does not actually creep Dan out in particular. He's actually somewhat intrigued by this fact, at least until he arrives at his room and discovers a peculiar photograph in one of the drawers on his side of the room where the person in the picture has had his eyes scratched out. So this bizarre discovery starts a whole chain of events where Dan begins to look into the history of the hospital along with two friends that he makes called Abby and Jordan. I guess both he starts to try to figure out like more about the photograph and also just some of the peculiar vibes that he's been getting, and they discover that a lot of things that went on in the history of this hospital may have been pretty terrible, and also that a lot of the people at this program and in the town may actually have connections to the hospital's rather grisly past. So I guess this struck me as a pretty normal kind of high school student scary story, although I think for me it was horror more in terms of the fact that people did really horrible things as opposed to horror in terms of being a particularly scary story, though could just be my opinion. Like if you know much about the history of psychology and what people used to do with mental patients, you'll probably have some idea of what I'm talking about. Something that I liked. I guess there weren't really many things that stood out to me, but one thing that I did appreciate, even though it wasn't like a huge part of the story, was just the fact that Dan had good foster parents. I think this caught my attention just because I've recently been learning more about the foster care system from someone I met, and there are a lot of good foster families out there, and it does seem like when I think back on a lot of what I've read that foster families are more often portrayed as like being really evil, and there really aren't a lot of stories that look at the good sides of it, and I think I appreciated that this story deviated from that norm. But something that I did not like was that I often found like the characters' emotional reactions and actions to be a little confusing. Like a lot of times they didn't make a lot of sense to me, and I also didn't really feel like Dan and his friends were really all that good friends. So just one example of what I mean by didn't make much sense to me, for instance, Dan was really jealous of a lot of people, like just talking to or interacting with Abby because it's the girl that he likes, and that's not technically a really uncommon thing. Like it always kind of annoys me, except it's really strange because he's known her for like a grand total of 4 days, and that makes it, more peculiar, I guess, in my opinion. So that's something that I did not particularly appreciate.